How would you introduce yourself to someone on the street?
I wouldn't. I'd ignore them.
Great.
I'd cross the road.
Okay.
No, honestly, I'd
At
do
a
that.
party then.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to those others. um,
Both myself and Chris have been debating about how to do an introduction to this wonderful audio experience that I think you're about to have. And actually, just introducing ourselves seems complex. So I'm going to begin with, hi, my name's Ted. I am sat across from this beautiful table with my good friend Chris. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I think you've done it for me, and actually that was a very nice introduction. You've taken the complex and made it simple. So my name's Chris, and I'm sat opposite my good friend Ted. There we go. Now we know who we are.
Now we know who we are. We've had now both Chris and I have worked together in some capacity for the last couple of years. But actually, this isn't a business conversation. We're not here talking about the world of work that we live in. We work in a really interesting sphere around culture, engagement, people, and like what I think stuff is important to do with like emotions at work. But ultimately, this isn't what we're here to talk about.
No.
It's actually a bit more fundamental about who we are. I think it's both people, but actually it's how we kind of identify as men in some capacity. And I think those are the conversations that are really difficult to have in and outside of work. So it felt important to have. Does that sound about right, Chris?
Yeah, there's lots of things which are different about you and I, but the one thing that unites us, amongst many things I'm sure, is we're guys in 2024, and being a guy in 2024, and I'm sure and beyond, it's tricky. Different.
It's different. All right, because right. Let's begin here actually, because I'm hesitant to be like, oh, it's hard being a man, because it's not. It's not. No, right. I joke about this. I rolled really well on the life lottery. I am a white, straight, heterosexual male in a first world country. You know, I have a huge amount of privilege behind me that is fueling everything that, like, personally and professionally, that I get to achieve. But it doesn't mean it's easy, and I think that's really what I think you mean by, like, it's complex there.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I guess we've probably rolled the same dice there. Middle class. Am I middle class? I guess I self-identify as middle class. I'm not too far away from middle age. And white, married, kid, usual, tick all the boxes of, I guess, being, I don't know, what does being privileged.
Hang on, have you got the big
like?
three? The big three that I think comes with, I'd say, the layer of privilege that is afforded to is you are married.
Married.
You have a child.
Have a child.
Do you own your home?
I own my home.
There you go. You've hit the big three.
Yeah,
those are
there
the
you go. Well, I may as well just check it all in now. Life's complete, right? But I guess that's the point of it.
Right, yeah.
My thing around this is, on face value, that's all smashing it. Life's great. Good job, good wife, good kid, all that sort of stuff. Nice part of the country we live in. Nice part of the world we're in. But there's still so much more to it. There's much more complicated things going on, particularly on the inside. And that's what I'm really fascinated in. And that's why I want to talk about this stuff. And I think this concept of what does being a man mean now versus where it used to be and where we're going in the future, it's wild. It's wild to me. And I think on face value, you're right. You go, yeah, what are you guys talking about? Shut up. People have it much more worse. Worser.
They do, and they do,
yeah.
Right? There are people, but and it's part of the mental health conversation, and one I've really come to understand. Just because someone is suffering worse than you are doesn't negate your suffering.
Correct.
It's really, as a man who has got those advantages and privileges behind him and around him that I recognise, I also have to recognise the fact that doesn't mean that I can't suffer, and that things aren't always rosy and easy and simple as they probably seem outwardly anyway.
100%. Your feelings are your feelings, and as my wife often says to me, they're valid. So it's fine. I think it's fine to talk about it, acknowledge it. You might have the good stuff, but equally, some of the bad stuff that goes on as well, right? And I'm all up for talking about it. And I think, actually, if we can use our positions with the privilege that we might have, been able to sit here and talk to you with some nice microphones in a nice building and say, look, here's our view and here's what's going on in our world. But the fact that we have the option and the opportunity to talk about it, bloody talk about it.
So let's start then with this like manliness piece, because I think that was where we began actually our exploring of what this conversation and this series of conversations is. when I've got a view of what I perceive as like manliness that's coloured in from like, you know, my childhood, the role models in my life, what I see on TV and media. How do you think about it though? Where do you like? I'd like to start with your own like, either if it's a definition or I don't know. What do you think? What is manliness?
Yeah, I think it's just a really tricky thing to nail down because it's changed so much, right? There's this whole nature nurture. It's the whole you're a product of your childhood, you're a product of your environment. All of that is probably true. I guess if I think about manliness for me personally, it's about my own self-confidence and belief in about who I stand for and what I'm all about, and how does that weigh up, rightly or wrongly, against external perceptions of what that should and could be. And it's that battle, it's that gap between who you think and feel you are versus what you think other people think and feel you should be, and trying to work out what's that bit in the middle, that kind of greyish area. And I think manliness has changed so much, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I don't think it is what it used to be. It's not what my dad would have said manliness is, or his dad would have said manliness is. I think it's. Do you think it's evolved?
Well, yeah, but I think it depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
So, like, my dad is 79 years old,
Sure.
or years young, if you ask him, and his perception of it hasn't changed, like, since he was a kid. And like, so for context, for anyone who doesn't know me, which hopefully is most of you, I grew up in the northwest of England in the 90s. So I was born in 1987. I grew up in like a farming and rural community in Lancashire, and like it's like the least progressive place I could have picked for myself to be, which is weird. Then I think that I end up in this sort of like working for tech companies and being a massive nerd about the rest of my life. I'm not, you know, I grew up in a world where like, you know, you play golf on a Saturday, men play golf on a Saturday first off. That's just what we do, and most of the week if you can get away with it. And there's no stigma about you going off to the pub immediately after work. And like a real job involves using your hands, you know, like those are sort of, like, I remember actually talking to my dad about when I started getting into like office work and software and all this sort of stuff. And it's a hard thing for him to wrap his head around what the job is, why it is valuable, and actually where my purpose and meaning comes from. He grows things. Like he ran a chemical fertilizer business and worked with farmers for 40, 50 years. And so he grows businesses, but he grows things it's things in the ground. It's very, very, very real and tangible. And it really coloured, I think, my perceptions of what it means. You were talking about like what you think it should be, what being a man should look like. That experience as a kid has been a real challenge for me as then I've got into like a wider world, and you see the world beyond West Lancashire. You move to somewhere like London was an amazing experience for that. Because all of a sudden you're like, crap, like there is way more about this than I could have ever dreamed. Yeah. But it's just, I think it took me a long time to reconcile and maybe get my head in the right space about just because someone says it should be that way doesn't mean it has to be.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I completely get that. So actually, I didn't realise in 1987, I'm 1987.
I think we would have been in the same school year. I think we talked about this once upon a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that matters. Now I'm nearly 40.
Well, that's the thing. I still reminisce sometimes. In my head, my mind's eye, I'm like, I wish I had said that or didn't do that.
What, when you were like 23?
No, when I was like 14. I was like,
right.
Like, why did I make that decision? Or why did I wear that pair of trousers? I still do that even today. So I grew up slightly differently, but in Northern Ireland. So for anyone wondering where the hell's that accent from, it's from Northern Ireland. And I grew up through the height of the Troubles, I suppose, in Northern Ireland. So pretty nasty stuff, people being bad to each other. And my dad was a prison officer, so pretty much in the thick of things.
So I was going to frame a hard man. That is, like, you know, like, what's a hard man do for a job? Like a prison officer in Northern Ireland during the Troubles is probably at the top end of that
up
for me.
There, absolutely. Only matched, I reckon, by a police officer at the time. But and I distinctly remember up until, I don't know, maybe until I was about 9 or 10, I had no idea what he did for a job. And that was a decision he made, and my mum made, I suppose, together to shield me and my sister from the realities of what he was experiencing. All the way up until I think it was about 9, I was under the impression he worked for BT. That was his little story. I work for BT. I'm like an engineer at BT. And then I found out, he decided one day, to be honest, I don't remember how I found out, but he said, no, this is what I really do. And this is why I protected you and your sister from the truth. And that was his role. That's how he saw his role in our family, was the protector, the shielder of all the nonsense that was going on. Because I guess, I don't know, did it come from a place of fear? Who's worried for our safety? Did it come from a place of, it's better we didn't know? But that really got me thinking about my role as a kid then, but growing into a man. Where does that leave me? And actually I don't know whether that kind of left me in a slightly different place. Perhaps the opposite of what he expected to happen was it left me a little bit distrustful, because up to that point, been living a little bit of a lie about what he did. I kind of could see the thought process around being the protector and kind of the lie. But then I said, oh, right. So you've been lying to me. Can I trust what you're saying? Can I trust what anyone's saying to me? And actually, with that shield of shielding us from the fear, can I trust anyone? Is anyone to be trusted? And actually, what that started for me is a perpetual cycle within myself of almost not trusting myself and how I build relationships with people. And it's only in the last sort of 10 years, really, I've started talking more about this stuff and reflecting back on this stuff and kind of opening up in my own mind about, I don't know, like, it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to talk about this stuff. Whereas up until about mid-20s, I was a closed book. Like, I'm going to deflect, I'm going to not let anyone in, I'm not going to talk about my feelings, because that's, I guess, how my childhood taught me to be, if that made sense. But it was for all the right reasons, but it just kind of manifested itself in, I guess, something which was not right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk about feelings, actually, because I think when I think about traditional views of manliness, and like we're saying, whether it has or has not evolved over time, I think as generations have gone on, it has evolved. Like, younger people have wider ideas, more liberal ideas, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm certainly in the headspace of that, but I'm not as good at it as someone who's in their 20s. Like, it's just, they've grown up in a world that was more social media aware and just out, like, things have progressed. I don't want to say the word woke, but that's the word. Like, it's been really weaponized, man. That's the problem. I find, particularly, actually, I hope, Dad and Mum, I hope you're not listening to this, but like, it has been weaponized by that generation of people who now use wokeness as a derogatory term. Like, to me, it's like, duh, be woke, be awake, look at stuff.
I like awake. Awake's better. Being awake is
better.
better than woke. But you're right. It's kind of that older generation going, oh, back in my day, load of nonsense. And look, maybe some truth to that, I don't know. But that awakening, I think, is more valuable expression to use.
When I started my career in the 20s, in my 20s, I worked for British Gas Business in an office, and I remember talking to people when they'd be like, and I would use this phrase to be like, someone's just responded poorly to something. It's all this wishy-washy feelings nonsense. Because that's the world I grew up in as a child, and the world of work that I perceived, that you don't bring your feelings to work, you don't share, and like, it's not, and I say it's not just a work thing, that transcribes to your personal life as well. So like, you don't explain to your friend, if you're having a shit day, you don't sit down with your friends and explain why, and talk to them about, actually I feel really vulnerable about this, and like, this is a really sensitive subject. Like, vulnerability was not on the agenda for conversations when I was having those really formative ones, probably between like 14 and 25. Yeah. There was that's partly due to where I was in the world and just the way I thought about it, but equally, like, I could give you actually a really weird one. And I find this bizarre as I've thought about it, is that I thought being gay was not a real thing, like a joke, until I was about 16. Mm-hmm. As in, like, there were no gay people. It was just, because it was used as a slur. It was a slur.
Expression
yeah.
Used, or a slur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we didn't know any gay people. Like, never saw them on the telly. No one, like, you definitely wouldn't identify as gay in the northwest of England. Sure. Like, in the 90s. That was not okay. So then when I remember I was at school, and like, it was just like, someone had come out as gay, and I was like, what do you mean that's real?
Wow.
And like, I can't. That was 20 years ago. Yeah. It's not even that long ago.
No, it's not.
Like, it's weird.
That's wild. That is wild. I think how much has not just society, but to come back to the workplace, changed. Right. I distinctly remember my very first proper adult job. Like, I'm not talking about washing dishes or anything like that. Proper adult job when I was 18. My manager at the time saying to me, I think I'd been out the night before or something, living the student lifestyle as Beautiful. You do. Not much sleep, come in, probably still pissed, to be fair. And I was, not feeling very well. I was like, I didn't say I went out, obviously. I was like, not feeling very well. I think I might have a bug, something like that. Very distinctly remember him saying, "That's for home. You're in work now, so just work." Now, this is self-inflicted, obviously. This was different to what we're perhaps talking about now. But I do remember that was my first impression of a manager. It was a male manager, saying to me, "Personal life, keep it away from here. Do not bring your nonsense, your baggage, anything else through these doors. When
Check
you're
your
at
feelings
work,
at the
you're
door,
work.
right?
Yeah, leave it at home. Not for us." And if I fast forward to today, how different workplaces are and are continuing to become, where like you can't disconnect, right? How can you possibly disconnect who you are as a person to what you're doing wherever you are? It's impossible.
This week, as we record this, actually, is Mental Health Awareness Week.
It is. I know. What a coincidence.
What a quinky
It's like we planned it.
Did we? I don't think we did.
don't think we
I
did.
actually forgot.
Happy coincidence.
Happy coincidence. But like I think it's really challenging because the rhetoric I keep seeing on this, particularly from a men's perspective, is we need to have the conversation. But what's missing is how do we have the conversation? How do we evolve the conversation? I think I'd be astonished if you polled men at the moment. I'd be astonished if there was a majority saying, "Oh, I think we're talking about mental health enough." But what's missing is just the tools to do it. I wasn't taught at school how to have a conversation with a gay person and bring it. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying it feels in the soft skills world, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But I have no idea how to approach that as a topic. I've learned over time, because actually it doesn't matter. They're just people.
Yeah.
And what you get up to in your spare time is your business, whatever, right? But it seems societally and culturally, all these things feel very important and complex. Whereas actually, I think, I don't know, there's something more. I don't feel empowered yet as a man to know how to talk to other men properly, or even initiate that conversation with them so they can come back to me. And I think I'm pretty vulnerable and empathetic at this point. Whether that is true or not is up for debate. But I've tried in my head. I think probably could do more.
Yeah, well, we could always do more, right? I think it's a really interesting point to say, yeah, we can talk, and we do talk about it. We hear all the time, right?
We should be having the mental health conversation.
We should be having the mental health conversation. Just talk to someone, reach out. And of course, that's absolutely correct. But yeah, the kind of getting through that awkward, how do you actually start it, or how do you actually do it?
Because you go with "Oh, you okay, mate? Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
And then you say the traditional advice was, "Don't ask again. Are you sure?
Are you sure? You're really okay?
Are you really okay?"
Yeah.
And they may well go, "Yeah," but then what? At what? So as part of my professional background, I've worked for a therapy company before. And it was a fascinating experience when you see. I've done therapy as well through this, and a lot of that was unpicking my own vulnerabilities and stuff that was I've wrapped around myself in, and it's masking, and at its core, it has always been that. But I'm still yet to find a place where you could feel safe as a person asking that. It's vulnerable to me. If it was me and you, and I say, "How are you?" "Not so good." I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the fear, right?
Yeah.
What if I ask you, what if you say you're not okay?
Yeah.
Then what the hell do I do with that information? And we see that in one of my hobbies, if you like. I'm a police officer, right? So I do this volunteer.
Of course you are.
I do this volunteering police officery stuff down in Brighton, and we obviously deal with a lot of mental health. There's a lot of poor mental health, and quite often, if unchecked, that leads to bad stuff happening, right? It might lead to crime, it might lead to self-harm, suicide, all that sort of stuff. And we're not equipped to deal with that. If we turn up to someone in the middle of a crisis, the training we've essentially got is do your best. Just do what you can. Engage with that person, have a conversation, the best way you can. But then what if they say to you, no, I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's like, all right, please don't. It's a really tricky thing, right? What the hell do you do? And I would bet my house on it that a lot of people ignore the conversations because they don't want to know the answer, or they're afraid of what to do with the answer, and therefore they just don't have it.
It's tricky because my work background is sales, and so the majority of my career has been talking to people, and you're taught techniques, right? There are conversational techniques, and as I understand it, I've not done a therapy accreditation or anything, but from speaking to therapists, Like that is how the frameworks of that work. It's not about asking, these are the lines. It's not a script that you go, oh, tell me about yourself. Aha, you said this, therefore that. Like, it's not that. But it is more of a mind space about like asking better questions, about actively listening to what someone's saying and what they're not saying. Like, what's the hidden thing behind there? What's the meaning? Getting to the like why of it.
Yeah.
And like from a sales perspective, I am trained to do that, to understand how businesses operate and how the solution that I am working on can benefit them and all this sort of stuff. But like in a personal perspective, you can apply some of that logic, and I feel very privileged and blessed that I have those skills. But I'll tell you now, it's not enough, and it is not. While it seems outwardly helpful, and again, I'm a empathetic, like outwardly vulnerable, or try to be like honest person. Yet it's still not enough for me. And if I know I'm struggling with it, then I bet my house that 95% of men, if it's not intimidating, it's outwardly like repulsive in some capacity. It's hard.
Yeah, massively so. And I think, my wife often says this to me. It's like, if she is having a rant about something, or something that's going on in her work life or personal life, or someone's said something to her she didn't like, she'll tell me. And over the years, where I've matured with this whole listening is, I've only done this through learning and being told off, is that you don't always need someone to fix you. You just need someone to listen to you. So you don't need to necessarily have a solution to what someone's telling you, right? But the fact that they've been able to get it out of their head to someone else, that's like half the battle sometimes,
Problem
if not
shared
more.
is problem halved, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
and like it doesn't. I'd agree.
Yeah, and recently, for anyone who listens to this, happens to be following me on LinkedIn, I was very open and honest about my own personal experiences this year of a double miscarriage. So me and my wife lost 2 babies this year, 2024, and I remember I find myself pacing up and down, so annoyed after the second one. And so annoyed that I didn't know who to talk to about it, or more importantly, I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. When I made a decision, I was like, I can either continue to pace up and down this lounge, and it drives me absolutely nuts, and I can feel myself getting more and more angry with the situation, the circumstance, but actually more so the fact that I didn't feel comfortable talking about it, or I can get it out of my head in the form of how I did it was in words, typing it. That felt easier for me to type it rather than speak it. And actually, I wasn't really expecting anything other than it just made me feel better, not just playing it in my brain, but getting it down, out, and I can say, oof, exhale a breath. I've said what I wanted to say. And actually what I found from that was an absolute torrent of support, messages, shared and lived experiences from other people. And it was almost like a club that no one wanted to be part of, right? It wasn't a nice thing, because nice is the wrong word to use to describe it. It was a club that everyone wishes they'd never heard of.
Yeah.
But we were a part of it, and actually it was anyone who'd experienced that sort of stuff. All of a sudden, we had these kind of shared experiences. People I've never met before, never laid eyes on before, were sharing their stories with me. And I kind of started thinking, if we did more of this, the stuff that we think, I can't say that out loud, that's too triggering for people, whatever else might be, but actually there might be other people out there that go, oh, I can't say that out loud, I wish I could. And all of a sudden you've got this connection with other people who have experienced or felt something similar. And for me personally, like, what a weight off my mind that I could just get it out of my brain and into someone else's.
So I remember seeing that post of yours, and it broke my heart, man. Like, it's really hard, and you were incredibly brave, I thought, and very vulnerable. You were right. I want to ask you. I don't want to ask too many prying questions.
No, ask away.
But like, in particularly through the lens as we look at like this masculine conversation, like. And I'd be really clear. I think the miscarriage conversation is just so difficult for women. I think my wife and me talk about this sort of stuff, and I understand the complexities of just navigating, like you say, triggering. There's just a fear of stigma. All of that stuff is absolutely there. But the masculine side of it, and I'm curious about your experience of that. Was that an additional barrier on top of what was already just the worst thing that can possibly happen?
Yeah, and yes, in simple terms, yes. And I think the reason for that, upon reflection, is I've kind of experienced a similar feeling, but the outcome was different when my daughter was born. Is I had this ingrained feeling of, with my wife, who was obviously when my daughter was born, struggling physically to recover and all that sort of stuff. Fairly traumatic birth. And then with this miscarriage, obviously emotionally, physically it was happening to her. I had this kind of feeling inside me of, I can't show weakness. Like, because if I show that I've felt or experienced this in a way, or I'm not holding it together, she's not going to have anyone to lean on.
It's the my job is to be strong
Correct.
thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And that did hold me back. My wife will always say to me, by the way, it's like, oh, well, like, tell me how you're feeling. Like, it makes me feel better knowing that you don't feel good. Like, we're sharing the same experience. Whereas obviously you go into my intention of going into that type of stuff is, oh, if I just show her I'm strong, I'm her rock, and she can lean on me, and, you know, I can be there as the rational one, the calm one. Doesn't matter what I'm thinking or feeling inside. This is all about her. And every time, like, this post, for example, she's like, why didn't you tell me you're feeling that way?
Did you talk to your wife before you wrote that? That's so. Do you mind me asking why?
For those exact reasons.
Yeah,
I didn't want. It's come back to that protector thing, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want her to know how much I was struggling because I didn't want her to feel like she would have to absorb my burden on top of the burden she was already feeling.
Isn't it interesting though that the cultural and I guess like the base level masculine in you would rather tell however many thousand followers you've got on LinkedIn than your wife?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's completely it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense at all. And obviously we spoke about it after the fact, and we have a very open and honest relationship about most things. But that's entirely on my side. That was, I don't know if blame's the right word, but it was me holding back. And it entirely comes down to that whole, I'm a guy, I should be seen to be the strong one in this relationship and in society in general, right? But then when you reflect back on these things, you think, and from opening up and posting it and people saying how brave you are and that sort of stuff, I didn't go into that thinking I'm brave. I've gone into it thinking I'm going to go mad if I don't say something. But then reflecting back on it, it's like, well, actually, if more people were brave, if you want of a better phrase, then more people would talk about it without feeling the need to think it's brave.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
I
It's
do.
kind of, it just becomes, that's just a rational and logical conversation to have about how you're feeling. It shouldn't be brave to speak about this stuff. It should just be okay to speak about this stuff. That makes sense.
It does. I'd like. It's so challenging though, isn't it? Because I can feel a nerve even just thinking about it. Like I'm talking to you here, like we're in a closed room, it's just you and me. I know there's people going to listen to it, but like I'll take this out if I don't want it in the thing, right? Yet there's still this like, is it uncomfort? Is it like, is it fear? I don't know. I'll tell you the other one as well, and I think this was something you and I talked about in the sort of run up to us having this conversation. I personally struggle with issues I feel like I don't have a full view of, right? So I'm not a dad. I've never suffered a miscarriage. I am, I'm in a very different space to this. And equally, like, I said this to you yesterday, right? I am nervous about talking about things like feminism and like a woman's perspective on the world because I ain't got it. Yep. I ain't that guy. Like, I do not have a rounded enough perspective to comment on what women should or do or be or feel or any of the all of that. Now, should I educate myself more? Yes. Am I nervous about doing it? Yes. Because like all of it is intimidating, and like I think even having a conversation with you about your own losses and challenges with miscarriage, I feel nervous about the fact that I'm not considering the woman's perspective enough, which is probably true. Like I probably am not, because I'm thinking like, if I was you, I'd be like, I don't even know where I'd start. Like my brain would be firing 1,000 miles an hour, and my gut would be falling out of me. You know, it'd be the worst thing I can imagine. Yet, I know as well, if it was me and my wife, I'd probably do the exact same thing you did, even though. I agree with everything you're saying. We should be talking about it. It should be open and simple. So I guess then to maybe like round it off a bit, like what can we do as men, and like what should we be doing? Not just like of course we should be having the conversation. Yeah. How do you do it?
I think that the first thing is don't be afraid of the responses, right? I was afraid of the response with the miscarriage stuff and whatever other topics of mental health. I think you were afraid of what you're going to get in return, or you're afraid, to your point, about you're going into an area that you're not educated about. Therefore, you might say something wrong, you might offend someone, and that sort of stuff. And I think as long as these conversations come from a place of genuinely wanting and caring and trying to help people, then that's okay. It's okay to like ask the wrong questions and say the wrong words, because what's the alternative? The alternative, particularly talking about guys' feelings here, the alternative is to say nothing, and we just carry on as if nothing is happening, which is just not true.
It's conflict avoidance for a start.
Yeah, it's just not true. It's not reality, right? We're all facing, every one of us, we're all facing our own problems, demons. They ebb and flow. There's big stuff happens, little stuff that happens. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's big, it's small, whatever else it might be. That's what's going on in that person's mind, in that person's world, those person's feelings. And if we are lucky enough to be surrounded by friends, if we're lucky enough to have loved ones or colleagues who kind of spot those stuff in us, then we're really privileged that people feel comfortable enough to kind of have those conversations, and it feels like a bit of a safe space. If you're in a world where you're not fortunate enough to have that, or you don't feel you've got those relationships, that's a really lonely place for guys to be in. It's like, where do I even turn to? And sometimes the place to turn to is the random stranger. It just takes that one person to say, hey, like, are you okay? And whether it's a friend, a colleague, a loved one, a therapist, a stranger, a doctor, whoever it is, the worst thing to do is to do nothing, right? That's one of those things, particularly when it comes to, that's one of the things we are taught about when it comes to suicide, or, the worst thing you can do is just avoid it. Doing nothing shouldn't be an option. Doing something should always be the first approach. And if that something is just shooting your mate a text that you've not heard from in a couple of weeks, or dropping your dad a message to say, hey, how's it going? What's going on? Did you see that football score last night? How wild was that? Just that conversation, because that might be the one thing that person needed at that moment in time to go, oh yeah, I'm not alone here, or that's a distractor to how I was thinking and feeling at that moment in time. So I think let's not overcomplicate it. Let's not overcomplicate what something is fairly simple. Just be a human being. Just reach out, care about the people you care about, and that 10 seconds it takes you to write a WhatsApp message and shoot someone a text, that could make all the difference, and you just never know.
So I think, like, to finish it off, what you were saying there was super, super interesting. I always think back to what, like, Simon Sinek talks about. And I saw one of his talks once where he talks about how to have a difficult conversation at work. And it's about sharing a vulnerability. I'll tell you the technique, and I think this is a great place to sort of finish off. I need to have a difficult conversation with someone. And I approach this person and I will say to them, I need to have a difficult conversation with you, and I am afraid to do it because I am scared of saying the wrong thing. And then you go and have the conversation. And the reason it works is not because, you're it's not some trick, but what you're really doing is sharing your own vulnerability, acknowledging that the other person that you're speaking with shares that vulnerability, and that I'm about to poke at it. I'm about to say some things that are going to poke at your particular vulnerability around a certain thing, and I am scared to do it, but we have to do it. And in the age where, everyone is connected, everyone is communicating all the time, actually being able to have honest conversations about real things and being able to share this vulnerability gives you a platform to have the meaningful conversation. I hope that helps.